Welcome back to The Heat. Syrian opposition groups and a delegation from Bashar al-Assad's government are meeting in Kazakhstan in hopes of reinforcing a ceasefire across Syria. The talks were organized by Russia and Turkey. Joining us from Damascus is Mohamad Ali, a Syrian journalist. Here with us in Washington is Mohammed Ghanem, a senior political advisor with the Syrian American Council. With us from London is Alexander Nekrassov, a former advisor to the Kremlin. And Aykan Erdemir is a senior fellow with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies here in Washington. Alexander, Russia is one of the main backers of these talks taking place in Astana. What is the end game for Russia? What would Russia like to see happen here?
Well, Russia obviously would like to see a ceasefire across Syria, leading to political negotiations which would help to find a political solution. Now, Russia was not expecting all that much from the Astana meeting, in a sense that during such meetings, it's the talks on the margins that are actually crucial. It's not those statements that we hear on the media, you know, and press conferences and so on. It was crystal clear for the Russians that the leaders of the military factions would be trying to save their, you know, credentials, face-saving exercises. So they would want to be seen in public, in the media, as being resistant to any pressure from the Syrian government and so on. What happens behind the scenes at such conferences, and I know because I've been a special advisor on Chechnya for the Russian Security Council, and I know how these talks go on. On the margins, contacts are established. On the margins, deals are concluded, horse trading is done. And this is the most important bit. And this is what Russia and Turkey and Iran are hoping that will happen in Astana between the Syrian government and the heads of the military factions. That's the most important bit. If that happens, if they click, even on some points, not everything, then the talks in Geneva will be much more, will be much easier. Nobody expects, obviously, next month to produce a political solution, but it's a start. It's a very important start. And as by the way, the same with the Chechnya and other conflicts, when the government starts to talk directly to military commanders, that is crucial. That is very important. That is maybe, on this stage, more important than talking with the political leaders of the rebels.
Right.
So I see this meeting as very important.
Right. Aykan, the one country that we have not talked about very much is Iran. Iran's playing a big role in these talks as well, playing a big role in Syria as well. What is Iran's role in Kazakhstan right now?
I think Iran is, in addition to the Kurdish forces and Turkish forces, the only other boots on the ground, because Russian involvement in Syria has been mostly through the Air Force. But Iran's involvement is through its proxies, is basically sending boots on the ground in Syria. So Iran, I think, has a crucial role to play. And ultimately, when Russia leaves, as my colleague here said, you know, Putin's involvement is more tactical. If and when Russia downsizes its involvement in Syria, I think Syria will still be left with Iran-backed militias, proxy powers. So it's crucial, I think, that Iran is in the talks. And at the same time, we have to keep in mind that Iran, together with Russia, are now two forces that Turkey has to learn to live with, because in the immediate aftermath of the coup, Turkish President Erdogan saw Iran and Russia as kind of two forces it could rely on against the failed coup attempt. And Turkey has been going through let's say, a rapprochement or normalization process with both. And we have to keep in mind that in 2011, regime change in Syria was a priority for the Turkish government. But at this point, Turkey has an existential issue, and that is the Kurdish issue. And for that reason, too, Iran and Russia seem to be more indispensable to Turkey. So it's now more an existential question than a political issue.
Events have changed on the ground significantly with the fall of Aleppo, right? Yeah. Mohammed Ghanem, if we look at Iran's role in this, what role would Syria like Iran to play in this?
What role would Syrians or the Assad regime?
The Assad regime. Yeah.
The Assad regime suffered in 2011, 2012. The regime was consistently losing ground. about 50% of the country was no longer under the control of Assad. So mainly because of course, it was a very popular movement, that's number one, and because they also had an issue with shortage of manpower. So the Assad regime needed Iran. They needed those militias that Iran sponsor in Syria. For example, in Aleppo, the Nujaba militia played a key role in the capture of Aleppo from its residents.
When you talk about that,
Iran provides Assad with men. Assad has a shortage of manpower.
I just want to get to a point that Alexander Nekrassov made, and that is the importance of direct face-to-face talks in negotiations like this. He cited the example of Chechnya. At the moment, as we reported from Astana at the beginning of the show, the two sides are talking through intermediaries. They're not direct face-to-face talks. At what point are they going to start talking to each other?
Well, actually, the opposition last time in Geneva 3, the talks that failed because of the intransigence of the Assad regime, the head of the Syrian opposition. By the way, I would just like to make clear to my colleagues that the Syrian opposition is made of armed opposition. There's political opposition, so it's not like it's just armed opposition. We're a whole movement. So the head of the Syrian opposition, Dr. Riyad Hijab, who was Assad's defected prime minister, said we would like to negotiate directly with the Assad regime. That's what he said. We would like to directly negotiate with Assad himself, with the Assad regime. But the Bashar Ja'fari, the head of the chief negotiator for the Assad regime, was not interested and engaged in the same theatrics that he engaged in this morning. So we, the Syrian people, have no problem negotiating with the Assad regime, but the Assad regime is not interested because the gentleman in Damascus made it very clear they would like us to go to Kazakhstan or whatever city it is to surrender. That's what he said, surrender. Okay. We're not going to surrender.
Let me get Mohammed Ali's position on this. Mohammed Ali, is it the Syrian government's position that they would prefer direct face-to-face talks with the opposition?
Well, Mr. Bashar al-Ja'fari said that the Syrian government is serious and honest about finding a political solution and that they will do and exert all efforts for that. So having direct negotiations is definitely not a problem for the Syrian government. In fact, the Syrian government wants a political solution. And regarding what the gentleman was saying over there in the studio, it was not what I said. It was President Assad. It was President Assad who said that actually such meetings in Kazakhstan should lead to reconciliation and having those armed groups surrender and get an amnesty from the Syrian government and fight alongside perhaps the Syrian government. Now, what is hoped by the Syrian government regarding what is hoped regarding the Astana meetings is that there would be a ceasefire, there would be perhaps a kind of a separation, as I told you, between the armed militants, the armed groups that are willing to fight terrorism and the terrorist groups. Then perhaps maybe every militant group and the Syrian army from where it is positioned could fight ISIL and the Al-Nusra Front and any other group that refuses to actually be part of this kind of a solution. At the end of the day, what we also should note too is that what Mr. Allouche, the representative of the opposition, said in the opening session in Astana, he said that the starting point for a political process should be the departure of President Bashar al-Assad. This is a condition, and in fact, the most important point of having negotiations is that they should be without any preconditions. So they continue those opposition groups wherever they come from, whether from Syria or from any other country, to say that President Assad must go. And this is, of course, definitely unacceptable because at the end of the day, this is something that the Syrians should decide over here on the ground. And of course, it is not in accordance with the constitution. So it is not acceptable anymore to have any figure or any country coming and saying that President Assad should go or stay. This is the Syrians' choice. And now the Syrian president is much more powerful than ever here in Syria, thanks, of course, to the Syrian army and the support of the allies like Russia and Iran.
Alexander, I want to get one other point in before we end the show, and that is the fact that the United States, of course, is busy installing a new administration right now. It only has observer status at these talks in Astana. But looking at Russia's involvement in the region, more broadly speaking, how does this increase Russia's influence in the Middle East?
Well, we're already seeing that Russian influence in the Middle East beyond Syria is growing. And with the change of the administration and the president in America, I think its influence will continue to grow because already, Trump has been signaling his desire to change the policy towards Syria, to increase the fight against ISIS and other terrorist groups. So that will play along well with the Russian policy. I think that this meeting at Astana is also proof of Russia's growing role and involvement in this whole situation. I think that we can also expect, hopefully, to see Chinese involvement grow as well, because last year Chinese involvement in Syria was expanding, and I think it is time for China to join Russia, hopefully with America, and these three superpowers would be able to, I think, would be able to increase the chances of success of political solution reached in Syria.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave. I'm sorry, we've run out of time. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.